All right. Well, I guess we'll get started. I'll introduce myself. I'm Scott Choquette. I work with Dewberry Engineers, and we've been the consulting team that's been fortunate to help the county update its hazard mitigation plan, which needs to be done every 5 years. This evening is the last of a series of public meetings to overview what we've done. If we can go to the agenda slide. So tonight we're basically going to overview the changes to the plan since the plan was last updated about 4.5 years ago. Go over those highlights, seek your input one final time, and then talk about last opportunities that there will be to review the plan and submit additional comments prior to its submittal to FEMA. Next slide. So for the members of the public and the audience, what is hazard mitigation? It's part of emergency management, but it's actions that we take that are long-term and sustainable, that can reduce or eliminate damages to people, injuries to people, damages to structures or infrastructure, and allow the government to continually operate with reduced stress on critical societal functions. So it's things that we do in advance of a disaster to make it easier and have less damage when the disaster occurs. So as an example, for wildfire, which is not a huge issue in PG County, but it is included, creating defensible space around a building, trimming back brush, could also be done for wind, keeping tree limbs away from power lines for ice storms and wind events, retrofitting a building or building a building above the flood elevation, or retrofitting for earthquake. Those are all long-term sustainable actions that reduce damages, and that's what mitigation is all about. The other phases of emergency management are preparedness, response, and recovery. And while there is some overlap, things like buying equipment to respond to disasters, that's not what the plan is all about. Is basically focused on those long-term things, and those long-term things can be projects like the things I mentioned, or they can be policy such as land use planning to keep new buildings out of harm's way, or building codes, things of that nature. So that's what this plan is about. If we go to the next slide. So why do we do this? Starting in 2000 with the Disaster Mitigation Act, it became a requirement of the federal government through the Federal Emergency Management Agency to have one of these plans and update it every 5 years in order to be eligible for certain forms of grant assistance. So FEMA makes money available to do these things, but you have to have a current plan. And the reason for the update is to make sure that you're looking at the hazards as they evolve and change, particularly in this day and age where the climate is changing and the environmental conditions are changing. But other reasons other than as a requirement, it's just a good thing to do. It supports decision making. It supports capital budgeting and decisions that the county and the city of Laurel make when they make decisions on where to invest. It's kind of that homework you do before you make an investment. It promotes data sharing between multiple levels of government, between the state and the counties and municipalities. And most importantly, it increases your resilience and promotes the adaptation to a changing climate. And again, in addition to reducing damages and injury to people, it reduces that need to, or lessens the need to respond. So a lot of times you think of a disaster, you think of buildings getting damaged, infrastructure getting damaged, but oftentimes the public safety and public work expenses associated with responding and recovering from a disaster can be more expensive than the actual physical damage. So these are all reasons why we do this type of planning. All right, Jade is going to take us now through the highlights and new additions to this particular update.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Jade Payne. I've been working alongside Scott to help Prince George's County and the city of Laurel update their hazard mitigation plan. So I'm just going to go over some of the highlights and new additions that can be seen in the draft plan. So we did a much deeper dive into future conditions in this version of the plan, and that's made up of a couple components, one of them being population. So we were able to take some state level population projections that were based on 2010 census data as well as American Community Survey data, and kind of take those a little bit farther into the future using the 2020 census data and some annualized growth rates to put up some potential population projections. We did recently get some more information on a new development for the city of Laurel, so we will have a population projection for them that will be added into the plan before it is sent to FEMA for approval. So that'll be another new addition. Another part of future conditions is future development. So trying to figure out where more buildings will be built, where people will be living, and where we may need to invest more money now to protect people and property into the future. So to do this, we looked at Prince George's County Plan 2035, which had some future growth areas in it, and we were able to overlay those areas with our identified hazard areas to try and figure out where some of those hotspots were. So we did that with riverine flood, extreme heat, dam and levee failure, and wildfire. And then the third component of future conditions is climate. So we wanted to see how these hazards may be changing in the future. Are they going to happen more often, less often, more severe, less severe? Just trying to predict to the best of our ability and project where we need to focus most of our efforts within the county. This is a new requirement by FEMA as well. So we were able to use the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation tool that the government recently put out. And from that, we were able to come up with kind of like a summary of climate projections for Prince George's County that were then integrated into the hazard risk assessment, which I will discuss now. So one of the new analyses that we did in this plan update was using what's called HAZIS. So this is just a software, basically a model that FEMA provides that allows you to estimate losses. So it takes some building information, takes some information about populations and people, what is likely to happen when a hazard occurs. So if a hurricane is coming through, where will that damage occur? What roads will be flooded? What buildings would be impacted? And the output of that model is some data that we then were able to project onto some maps, as you can see here, as well as some tables that provided like estimated monetary losses. And we were able to do that for riverine and coastal flooding, as well as hurricane and earthquake. And this was not used in the last plan at all. So this is a pretty major update. It's a much more extensive way to analyze these hazards. Another update that we made to the risk assessment was in the summary section. So after we had done all of the hazard analyses and assessments, we were able to provide kind of a succinct summary, as you can see in this table. And what we did this time around was develop a hazard risk index score, which was just a little bit more accurate way to compare the hazards against each other and find some kind of general ranking, as you see here, ranking some hazards as high, where we should probably focus the majority of our mitigation efforts, or a strong portion of it. Then we have some moderate hazards that we still need to focus on, still posing quite a significant threat. And then we have some low hazards that, aren't as threatening to the county and the city, but we still want to include, and we still continue to run these updates every time we update these plans of these hazard assessments, just to make sure nothing has changed and the risk stays the same. So that's why we also look at some low ranked hazards as well. And just kind of as a summary throughout the whole risk assessment section, there's all new maps throughout it, new tables, new analyses, integrated data from many other county and city sources as we could to make it as comprehensive as an update as possible. So these are just a few of them. There are plenty more, and the plan is currently available to review online as a draft plan right now. So feel free to page through there and see all the other changes. So after we go through and do a risk assessment and try and figure out, what hazards are posing the greatest risks and where, it's time to try and develop a mitigation strategy. So, we know what hazards we need to focus on. So how do we prevent damage from occurring? How do we address them? That's what the mitigation strategy does. So we're able to update the mitigation goals for the county and the city of Laurel. In the last plan in 2017, there was one goal that was pretty overarching, pretty broad. And this time around, we went ahead and created 4 goals, the one in the green box here on the screen. So they still fit into the overarching goal that was in the last plan. They just call out a few more key components that we wanted to focus in on a bit more. So we went ahead and updated those. And then once we had those set as kind of our guiding principles, then we were able to develop some action. So this is the actual projects, where we might do some kind of flood mitigation project, something to address extreme heat, something basically to address every single hazard that was in the plan for both the county and the city of Laurel. So there's plenty of actions in there, and it's not only physical projects. We have things about increasing the capabilities of the county. So are there folks within the government that should get some training so they can, better work towards some of these other mitigation projects? Are there, should we take advantage of some opportunities for FEMA or another federal agency to help us out? Should we do more outreach opportunities? Should we change some policies or some building codes, things like that? So it's both physical and non-physical, so like policy and capability building actions and projects. And then we moved on to the implementation plan. So, we built this nice fancy plan. We did the risk assessment. We built the mitigation strategy. We have our path forward. And the hardest part and the most important part is how do we actually implement these actions and projects? So how do we make some real change happen within the county and city? And that's where this addition of technical assistance came in. So technical assistance is basically help that you can apply for from the government or sometimes from some private organizations, especially nonprofits, to try and get help implementing these projects. So sometimes, you need to apply for a grant, and there are some tricky requirements for getting grants. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of expertise, a lot of the time, and it's a big burden. So you can apply for technical assistance, reach out for help, and there's plenty of people out there, organizations that are willing to provide this service. So what we did is we compiled a table with some of the more common technical assistance options, provides an overview, name, and some contact information or an application form for how to get that process started. And then we also included some case studies to just kind of get the ball rolling with like some potential ideas, how the technical assistance could be helpful in a few different cases, and what could result from taking advantage of some of these opportunities. And then along the same lines, we included an overview of potential funding opportunities. So a table that goes into what these opportunities are, what type of opportunities they are, such as funding types. So a lot of grants. I think there was some loans or something similar to that in there as well. A lot of the sources ended up being like FEMA and federal sources. There were some private and then state level ones as well. and then some information about how much funding is available from each one of those, if there's a local cost share. So for a lot of these grants, it's not just, full funding for a project. You'll have an agreement that, okay, we'll get this grant and it will provide 75% of the cost, but then we as the county or the city need to put up that other 25%, and the percentages can vary, but that's kind of the model that a lot of them follow. And then we were also able to put together kind of an annual progress report template to help kind of track how progress is going with these. Are we implementing projects? If we're not, why not? Can we, re-strategize and figure out what the biggest challenges are here? Do we need to take advantage of more technical assistance? Do we need to apply for more funding opportunities? Kind of like an annual way to check in and make sure that we're staying on track with the plan. And then this side is a little bit of a catch-all with a few different things, but overall, like I've mentioned before, we want to make this plan actionable. It's all about implementing these projects and actions. So what we did is we aligned a lot of the elements of the plan with some of the most popular grant programs, so that when the county and city goes to apply for some of these popular grants that are through FEMA, they have the information and the content that they need to make those grant applications as easy as possible. So this meant including some social vulnerability information, which is helpful not only for grants, but just for the essence of it. And that was a big priority of the county and city throughout all of this as well. So we use CDC social vulnerability index data to help us see where the most vulnerable people were, so where we may need to focus more time, attention, and help with some of these mitigation projects. And then we were also able to make sure that we're aligning the mitigation plan with other county and city documents and plans and reports to make sure that everything's cohesive. We're not saying one thing in one plan and then the opposite in another. We want to make sure it's one common voice for the city and then the county. And then we also included something called Community Lifeline. So this is a big part of FEMA's BRIC program, which is one of their grant programs. And basically it just highlights like the most important pillars of a community that keep it going during a hazard or natural disaster. So, a hospital, communication systems, transportation, healthcare services, all of that. So we have a section in there on community lifelines, and we also have a giant table in the back of in the appendix that lists the critical facilities throughout the county and city, which is basically community lifelines going by another name. So all the important and critical facilities and infrastructure in the city and county, and then what hazard areas they are in. And that can just help with targeting specific facilities and infrastructure for mitigation projects. And I will toss it back over to Scott.
Right. So what happens next? After we complete incorporating all the comments that we have from all the stakeholders and members of the public, the plan has to go to the state emergency management for review. They review it against the regulations and the guidance to make sure that they believe it's fully compliant. We address any comments that they have, and then it goes off to the Federal Emergency Management Agency Region 3 for their final review and approval. And once it's approved, it has to be adopted by the county and the city of Laurel, officially adopted, and then it becomes an updated plan. So there is a final, the plan is drafted, as we've said. It's available for public review. And there is also a draft plan review survey. The review period will be open to the public until the Sunday evening at 11:59 p.m., at which point we'll close down the survey, stop taking comments, and incorporate all the feedback and input that we get into the final plan so that we can get it submitted to the state and working its way through the review process. There would be one final opportunity for for additional comments at the public hearing that will happen when it's adopted. But really now is the time to, if you haven't already, to complete the survey and give us your feedback. There's a QR code on the screen and also a link. We'll go to a question slide, but we can put this one back up if people want to grab it with their phone or jot down the link. So that was a lot of information in a short period of time. We're happy to open it up now to any questions, comments, or feedback anybody might have.
Feel free to unmute and ask a question or provide feedback, or you're welcome to type in the chat as well.
Betty, you have a question?
Yes, I'm just wondering about certain areas in PG County, like mine, which are older neighborhoods, and I'm thinking about the severity of the damage and mitigating that. I noticed that in my area, and I'm sure there are many others like mine, there are two issues that come up every time there's a storm or some severe weather event occurs. We have an inordinate amount of flooding because we have a very antiquated and not maintained water system and sewage system here. So everything, it cannot handle the capacity for anything that we would call a storm. And we have a lot of old trees that fall. The recent storm we had, the trees were falling on houses and causing damage. So I don't know if there's anything that each city has to do to maybe get some kind of funds to be able to improve the water management, and maybe things like trees that are, possibly not steady enough to be able to withstand. I don't know. I'm just asking, but because I think that I just see the damage in these certain areas is much more severe than in others. And I think that we can do things to make that better. So I'm curious about your response to that.
I'll start and then I'll let Jade fill in anything I miss. There has been, traditionally we think about flooding as, flooding coming out of the river or out of the bay, and, leaving its banks and flooding things out. But lately, with climate change, there's been a lot more high intensity rainfall events that are dropping a lot more water over a shorter amount of time, and that's overwhelming older storm systems. So the problem you describe is common and it's getting worse. So I believe there is a mitigation strategy in there to look at. It's called, in the industry, we call it pluvial flooding, but it basically just means stormwater flooding. So it's not directly from the river or the sea, it's from overwhelmed stormwater systems. There's a strategy in the plan to find some funding to study that, and so that the county has a better and the city have a better handle on exactly where those problems are. And some of these grant programs that we've mentioned, like BRIC, which stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, do have funding available to address those problems. Oftentimes they're countywide and citywide problems, worse in certain areas, obviously, where the infrastructure is oldest. But there are funds available to do that. With the tree damages and power outages, that tends to be a little bit more of a utility company issue, but it's also identified in the plan and acknowledged as a problem and something that needs to be addressed. Do you have anything to add to that, Jane?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. What was the name of the area when you're in? I just want to make sure it's identified in the plan, so it just helps us do some projects.
College Park.
In College Park, is that what you said? Okay. Yeah, thank you. We have, so for earlier on in the process, we had a story map that had like a public mapping opportunity where people could go in and kind of like drop a pin on a map, where they had some like flooding problem areas or any other hazard problem areas. And there was some areas in College Park that were identified, but we'll make sure like your input is noted so that will be included in the plan as, a potential hotspot where some actions can be taken.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, and then Michael Weekly in the chat had a question. Are you looking for input from those that don't live in Laurel or just residents? And the answer is yes. This is a countywide effort. So Laurel is an incorporated city that participated in the process. That's why they're called out kind of separately. But the plan covers the entire county and all of its unincorporated areas. So if you have a question, feel free to ask.
And I'll just add that if there's anyone on the call that isn't necessarily a resident, but maybe you're like a business owner or a frequent visitor or something, all feedback is welcome for anyone who has a vested interest in the county or city.
Yeah, good point. Are there any other questions or comments or feedback? Now, maybe you could just go back to the previous slide. Thanks. Yeah, so this is the opportunity to provide that feedback. I would also say that once the plan is submitted and eventually adopted, always feel free to provide your feedback to the county, because this has to be done again in approximately 4 years. So the county and the city compile that feedback and incorporate it into the plan, which is the reason for the update. So it's, even though the comment period is closing on this update, the comments are always welcome to inform the next one.
I see there's just a question in the chat about the presentation. Yes, the presentation will be posted on the website. So we have kind of a YouTube channel where we've been putting these, and the link will always be available on the Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Jade, I think you hit your mute button mid-sentence.
Whoops. I will put the website that all the information for the plan is being compiled into the chat, and we'll hope to get the presentation up there. It takes a little bit for it to process, but we should have it up there hopefully by tomorrow, or if not, next week. And we have older presentations up there too. So we have all the meeting recordings from not only the public meetings that we've done, but also the Mitigation Advisory Committee, which is made up of county officials and city officials and other members of the public who have been doing a great job of participating throughout this whole process. So helping us come up with the mitigation strategies, making sure we are incorporating the right data into the hazard risk assessment, and providing valuable input throughout the whole process. So those meetings are also there. So there's ones that provide more of a deep dive into the risk assessment results, some that go over the mitigation strategies, so how we made some decisions and determinations there. And if you don't want to sit through a whole video of that, as exciting as they can be, we also have just the PowerPoint presentation, so you can just click through at your pace. But I also did want to highlight that we have the draft plan review survey here, and if you scan the QR code or go to the link, there's a link to the draft plan and the draft appendices that are there. But to provide feedback, you do not need to read the entire plan. If you want to, that is fantastic, and I'm very excited to hear that. But if it is a long plan, there's a lot of information in there. I would just want to highlight especially the mitigation strategy chapter. It's not too long. It's pretty straight to the point, and it may have some of the most valuable information that you could see there. So I'd point that out, and then also just say, taking a look at some of the hazard maps. Like a lot of folks have pointed out that flooding has been a big concern. So just taking a look at some of those maps and seeing, do you feel that they accurately reflect the risk and issues that you're seeing? And if not, we would love to hear that feedback. So that's a way that you could provide kind of a tailored bit of feedback without having to read through the entire plan word for word.
Any last questions or comments, concerns? Well, hearing none, thank you very much for participating. Please do feel free to reach out, provide input before Sunday evening, or reach out to us afterwards, and we will capture that information and incorporate it as best we can. Thanks very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.